And when I hung up, I called out. I cried out, just I don't even think vocally. I think just mentally to I didn't think this, if there's a God, but I was talking like, "Okay, God, if you're there, I'm done. I cannot do this. It's in your hands." And I meant that with everything. I
Mhm.
completely gave up. I completely surrendered. And I said, if these monsters kill me, so be it. Um, whatever happens, I'm no longer trying to fight anymore.
Mhm.
And in that instance, a complete wave of serenity came over me. Serenity, peace, silence. It was the most serene I had ever been in my human experience so far. And it was magical. These things had been ripped from me. Um, Pain had been ripped from me. The fatigue. It was almost as if I was floating. I just felt so peaceful. And I started feeling some tapping on the palms of my hands and my feet. And then I heard this loud booming voice. And I don't know if it was external. I don't know if it was internal. It was just so ever present. It said, "Are you ready?" Well, something just came and answered my prayer. I didn't hesitate for a second to think about what that meant. And instantly thought yes. And in that instant, um, I had I felt three massive pounds on my chest, and my heart had stopped, and I was detached from my body. And that is the beginning of what is an incredible near death experience.
This is Dale Cross, and welcome to another edition of the Soul Inspire podcast. This is the audio video podcast that features spiritually awakening souls to help inspire you on your own soul journey. On this episode, my guest is Bri Lafferty. She is an award-winning author of three compelling nonfiction books that detail her profound journey through a rare chronic neurological disorder, a near death experience, and the healing she uncovered along the way. These extraordinary experiences have led her to become, this is very interesting, a passionate death and spiritual doula. We'll have to find out all about that. Bri, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. All right, Bree. Let's start out with what I usually start out, well, with I always start out asking people, and that is take us back to your childhood and tell me what kind of spiritual did you have any spiritual background when you were a child, or how did that go?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. So, a big part of my journey is I grew up in a non denominational Christian home. And looking back, it was probably more along the lines of fundamental Christianity. Um, some pretty strict rules and, just very much had to be all in it, all about the faith, all day, every day, and which was fine, and I was always confused. Knew I had, given my heart and my, you know, everything to, Jesus, which was, the only way, the truth and the light. And without him, you're damned to hell, basically. And it was interesting because as a child, I'd, end up in new churches with friends and stuff, just, sh- that's what kids do. They kind of go with their families and their friends and stuff. And I would never be too sure when the question would be come up, "Are you saved?" And you should be really sure, and I just never was. I did everything that I was supposed to. I read the Bible, went to church, tried to live with a heart of God and, live the Christian life.
Yeah.
But I was pretty sure I was saved most of the time. And, I wanted to be. So it's like, where's that disconnect?
Right.
Um, and around the age of 10, I started experiencing some really weird symptoms. We didn't know at the time. It was just a weird hand flutter here and there, and some cramping at my hands and my legs and my arms, and the cramping would persist like all day long, and it was really weird. But my parents thought, just growing pains, and that would continue to progress for a couple years with more symptoms, more severity of it, more pain and stuff. And just, I was in puberty. We thought it was growing pains. And uh, around that same time, maybe a year or two after these weird symptoms started, I started seeing ghosts in my basement. So it was a beautiful house, pretty new, about 5 years old, and it was my sister and I loved it. We got the whole basement, 2 bedrooms, a bath, a living room, everything downstairs. It was wonderful. However, both of us started seeing weird things.
Mhm.
For me, it started with ghosts, and they were harmless. I wasn't scared. They left me alone. Um, I my favorite one was seeing 4 guys playing poker, and they were about 18 inches levitated off the ground,
Wow.
and kind of set in an old bar scene. That was like really fascinating. I was like, oh, that's really cool. Saw some other ghost, and my sister and I didn't really share these experiences with each other. We shared it with my mom, which later told us that we were both experiencing these things, but I don't think she wanted us to freak out, so she kept it to herself for quite a while. But
Mhm.
my sister was seeing really interesting, she was also seeing ghosts, and she was seeing even ghosts of animals, like gerbils and hamsters and guinea pigs and really weird small animals. She kinda got really freaked out, so she moved out of the basement into the guest bedroom upstairs, and I was like, "Yes!" I'm 12-ish years old, and the whole basement to myself. I felt like I was living, the rock star life,
Mhm.
and, uh, then things started getting scary. At this point, I was not sleeping. I had developed pretty extreme insomnia,
Mm.
and I mean, an hour or 2 a night if I was lucky. Um, and so I'd be up till 3, 4 a.m. and maybe get an hour or 2 of sleep before I had to be up at 6 for school the next day. But when I did sleep, I started being plagued with horrific nightmares. I mean,
Mm.
just things that I didn't think I'd ever encountered before. And I thought I was crazy for my brain coming up with these horrible things. And, if I never experienced these things, how could I create such a horrible thing? And like I said, very fundamentalist Christian home. Our TV was very limited, our movies were very limited, music, everything. So I was not exposed to what was going on in these dreams.
Mhm.
Then, the ghosts were no longer ghosts. They had become entities, and there was one time I saw this doll, an heirloom doll that had lost its eyes probably 100 years ago, glow its eyes red and turn its head and stare at me, and
Oh,
that freaked me out to my core. It was
yeah.
absolutely terrifying.
No kidding.
There was this other entity, it wasn't a ghost, it was more of a shadow that would go kind of like not really slide, but go across our wall in the basement, and it had a top hat and a shadow, or top hat and a cape, and
Mhm.
I call it the Shadow Man. And even when I had a slumber party with some gals from the church, we were all watching a movie, and the entertainment center, half of us saw the reflection. And we turned around and saw it, and the other half was just like, "Oh, you guys are making it up. You've made this story up before." But the four of us were freaked out.
Yeah.
Did not know at this time my sister was seeing the same thing with her friends. It
Mm.
would take it took until I was researching um, a little more when I wrote my first book, White Flame, that details all the paranormal metaphysical craziness leading up to my NDE, that I found
Mhm.
out this is a well-known dark entity that appears to children in basements around the whole world.
Wow.
So, that was, gosh, maybe not quite 20 years later after we started experiencing this.
Mhm.
We also found out that the previous tenant or the previous owners of the house, their kids had played with an Ouija board. And while an Ouija board was intended for beautiful things to communicate with deceased loved ones, right? It was not intended for maliciousness, it wasn't intended for harm. But what was unintended consequence is it opens portals, and not everything that comes through is what you intend it to be. So kids who have no idea what they're doing can really create these portals, and it can cause pretty big havoc. The area was also, we later found out, was is well known for occult practices. So sacrificing small animals and stuff like that. So,
Mhm.
kind of looking backwards kind of explains maybe why we started seeing these things. But I was saved, and if you're saved and by Jesus, and you believe in God, and you believe he'll protect you, you believe in him,
Right.
I was taught that you are protected, that nothing can touch you.
Mhm.
And so I just kind of was like, okay, these things are scary, but I'm saved. I'll be fine.
Okay.
That wasn't necessarily the case. As the years progressed, I would see more and more dark entities, apparitions. I would start voluntarily or involuntarily astro traveling and encountering these dark things in other dimensions outside of my body. And I had no idea what was going on. My church didn't recognize demons, ghosts. Um, even I saw auras as a kid, and my mom told me not to tell anybody
Mhm.
because I'd be like shunned from the church. I didn't tell my dad a lot of these things either. She was more spiritually open, where my dad was, this is the way, and the church, everything the church says is gold and gospel.
Right.
So I would divulge to my mom, who was way more open, thankfully. Otherwise, I probably would have thought I was losing my mind many times.
Mhm.
And so these involuntary astro travelings, these more apparitions, I just kind of dealt with it. I tried smudging stuff, my house when I'd see them, and just trying different things that I heard of a little bit in the spiritual community. By this time, I was more introduced into the metaphysical side, but not by much. I mean, we still didn't have social media or the internet, um, and it was still fairly infant, in its infancy. So I didn't hear a lot of these stories, and I'd go to a couple metaphysical fairs and get a little bit here and a little bit there. Well, along this whole timeline of these interesting spiritual experiences, I was also developing more and more symptoms in my illness.
Mhm.
So my twitching and muscle cramping came to full blown non epileptic seizures, tremors, nerve pain, OCD, anxiety, depression, full blown insomniac, where I now am not sleeping upwards of 3 days. I mean, not a cat
Mhm.
nap, not a second, just pure no sleep for days. So that's getting worse, and I don't get diagnosed until 18. And with a diagnosis, we thought, oh, with a diagnosis, there's hope. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. It was a very, very rare illness, myoclonus dystonia, a rare
Mhm.
uh, chronic neuro movement disorder. And, it just wreaked havoc on my body. I refused to let it stop me. Whenever it would take away one of my abilities, I would just adapt and try something different. Like, I loved drawing. I loved disappearing into my drawings. I could spend hours just doing detailed sketches of people and scenes. But when I started to tremor, I could no longer do those fine art movements. So I switched to painting.
Mhm.
And my whole life has kind of been along those lines. If I'm no longer able to do this, then I'll just switch and do that. The doctors told me, don't go skiing, don't go rock climbing, don't drive a motorcycle, don't go swimming, all of these could lead to your death. And so basically, the medical professions were telling me, stop living your life in order to live. I didn't
Mhm.
listen.
Right.
I did everything I absolutely could, and until I couldn't do it. So,
Mm.
I skied, I rock climbed, I had a few motorcycles, I love swimming, and if it kills me, it kills me. So I faced my mortality at a young age. One, they were
Mhm.
telling me all this when they didn't even know what was wrong with me. They said, "Stop living. We don't know what's wrong with you, but if your symptoms could kill you if you do this."
Mhm. Mhm.
So what? All right, cool. It kills me. How is that a bad thing? So I faced mortality at a pretty young age. I think first time I really thought about it was 14 or 15, and wasn't diagnosed till 18. by the time I was diagnosed, there was no really any other options that we hadn't tried already. So it was like, do your best to deal with it. Okay, cool. That didn't help. Well, my mom had never given up hope, always been my advocate, my warrior. She was always trying, conventional medicine, alternative medicine, holistic medicine. I mean, we tried the gamut of things.
Mhm.
And when I was 26, she came across spirit release therapy. And sometimes these entities, when they're attached, can cause havoc on the body and cause these weird, crazy, rare illnesses and symptoms. And, by this time we'd already tried, gosh, Chinese herbs, which were awful. Gosh, the worst tasting thing you could probably ever imagine. Acupuncture, chiropractic, hypnosis, mindfulness meditation, Reiki. I mean, the list is pretty extensive. So let's try another one.
Mhm.
There none of those really gave me side effects like conventional medicine did. So let's try this. Especially her knowing my history and all the crazy, things I'd seen and witnessed. So at 26, a couple weeks before April 27th, 2017, we hired a spirit release therapist remotely. And I had a, conversation with her once or twice, and she said she could do everything in the background and to expect to get a little ill. She said these can cause flu-like symptoms or moving energy. Just different things can cause flu-like symptoms.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. So she starts, and I start getting a little sick on top of my, already very prevalent illness that causes havoc every day. And I get more sick and more sick. And I get to the point where I'm no longer eating. I'm barely holding down fluid. I'm basically married to the bathroom. And I'm just really, really tired. So we ask her to stop. Obviously, something's going on, something's going wrong. And um, my nightmare started to ramp up. And these thoughts in my head started getting crazier. And I knew they weren't mine. Things just got really loud inside my head, and my body was taking a beating on top of its already fatigued, fragile body, and I wasn't sleeping. And unbeknownst to us, she did not stop. She continued. At this point, I knew there were quite a few dark entities attached, six or seven, and um, my mom and I decided to go into prayer. At this point, I didn't know where my faith was. I'd cried out, screamed out, begged, prayed,
Mhm.
everything as a teenager to a God, and it was never answered. So I figured it couldn't hurt. So my mom and I were in prayer almost 20 hours a day for the 3 days leading up to my experience. And as we were in prayer, these things got more malicious and more angry, and they started attacking me physically. Already on top of my chronic illness, now my flu-like symptoms, they're, trying to attack me physically and psychologically, not
Mhm.
sleeping. And at 2 in the morning, I am so exhausted. And I mean that with everything. My soul, my heart, my mind, my body, of course my body. My body's been through the ringer for 16 years at this point. And I tell my mom I'm going to hang up to try to get some sleep. That was not my intention. I knew I should say that so she could try to get some sleep. They're actually knowing they knew something was going on pretty heavily, so they had booked a flight to come see me. And when I hung up, I called out. I cried out. Just I don't even think vocally. I think just mentally to I didn't think this, if there's a God, but I was talking like, "Okay, God, if you're there, I'm done. I cannot do this. It's in your hands." And I meant that with everything. I
Mhm.
completely gave up. I completely surrendered. And I said, if these monsters kill me, so be it. Um, whatever happens, I'm no longer trying to fight anymore.
Mhm.
And in that instance, a complete wave of serenity came over me. Serenity, peace, silence. It was the most serene I had ever been in my human experience so far, and it was magical. These things had been ripped from me. Um, Pain had been ripped from me. The fatigue. It was almost as if I was floating. I just felt so peaceful. And I started feeling some tapping on the palms of my hands and my feet. And then I heard this loud booming voice. And I don't know if it was external. I don't know if it was internal. It was just so ever present. It said, "Are you ready?" Well, something just came and answered my prayer. I didn't hesitate for a second to think about what that meant. And instantly thought yes. And in that instant, um, I had I felt three massive pounds on my chest, and my heart had stopped, and I was detached from my body. And that is the beginning of what is an incredible near death experience.
Great. Let's go into that. That sounds very interesting. And I just love how you said you surrendered. I've heard this kind of story many times from different people where they surrender it and then there's this instant shift. I love that. That's beautiful. Okay, continue with your near death experience.
So I was instantly separated from my body. I was separate from this thing called human, earth. I had no recollection. I had no body. I was pure energy in pure blackness. But this blackness wasn't scary. It wasn't dark. It was so full of love and energy. And in this darkness, I could see without seeing the creator, the God, the being that just had saved me. And it was pure love and pure energy and power and just amazingness. Like there are no words to articulate what this being was. And
Mm.
I just knew I was home. I knew that I had come from this being and from this place. And there was no judgment, there was no anger, there was no um, I used to say it was compassion, but compassion kind of leads to say that there's judgment or,
Mm.
kind of disappointment even. And there was none of that. It was just pure extreme love. It was amazing. And even though I was unfamiliar with being a human or this thing called Earth, my consciousness knew there had been a shift, a major shift. And I just had this thought: Am I dead? Well, out of the darkness, three monks appear and they float by. They don't say a word, but they're kind of laughing at me. And I think, well, that's curious. But their laughter was as if to say, if you only knew. I would have no idea what that meant for 5 more years after this experience.
Okay.
So, they disappear back into the blackness, and I end up in this beautiful, magnificent, bright, ethereal blue tunnel, and
Mm.
I'm going in it, like, horizontally, if there was any relative space. I'm going horizontal, I'm still just a soul body, and I'm being downloaded with code and information, and I'm not aware of what the information is, just know that it's so important and exciting. In this tunnel, it's filled with ones and zeros. I'm going through it at supersonic speed, and it's just like, whoa, like the universe, the information. So after this tunnel, I end up in a white room. And I call it a room. It doesn't have any structures of a room, no windows or doors or floors or anything. It's just a space. And behind me, I can tell it's an ascended master teacher. Because
Mhm.
of my spiritual upbringing, I relate him to Jesus. I didn't see this person or being, but I could feel whose energy it was, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And in front of me is a huge pile of black numbers, and they're all just kind of piled on in out of order. But I finally have a human body looking form, and I grab these numbers and I throw them up with such childlike enthusiasm because I knew the universe was created in math. And don't know why I was so excited, but I was like, no wonder you love creating. And I was just so joyous over this
Mhm.
information that the universe is created in math. And after that, I end up in yet another area, which now I'm starting to think are possibly different dimensions, different levels. And in this place, it's filled with other beings. I have lost my human form again, and I can't tell if anyone's ever been human. I'm still not aware of what this thing called a human is. This is all after, hindsight. Like, I don't know if they're human before because I don't know. They all looked like kind of these dolls,
Hmm.
and I don't know if they were human. I don't know if they were what we would call extraterrestrial. Just I had no idea, but there were no words ever spoken in this amazing place that was kind of reminiscent of Earth, even though I wasn't familiar with Earth. Um, and everyone was so connected and so in tune that no words had to be spoken. Thoughts also became a reality instantaneously.
Hmm.
So, a few examples, I was watching some beans sliding down snow-covered trees, and I just had the thought, "I don't think I like snow." Instantly, the trees are lush, filled with lush green moss, and I'm sliding down them like Tarzan, and I'm thinking, "Oh, if I created this reality, what if they actually do like snow and they're sliding down snow, but I'm seeing them slide down green while I'm sliding down green and they see me slide down snow, and we're creating our own reality separately together."
Yeah.
And it wasn't this crazy conundrum that, it sounds like now. It was just like, "Oh, that's cool," and moved on.
Mhm. Hmm.
Um, and another time I was a snowman. I know, so ironic because I just mentioned how I didn't like snow. The universe loves their irony. Uh, so these other beings are working on a machine, and at the end of the machine has a huge flame. And I just have the thought, wonder what happens if I get too close? Will I melt? Sure enough, instantly I am underneath the flame, melted in a puddle of eyeballs. I have the thought, wonder if anyone will put me back together. Instantly, beans came around and put me back together. So no words were ever spoken, but no words were ever needed to be. Thoughts instantly manifested, instantly created reality. There was a
Mhm.
time we even danced together as if we had choreographed for millennia. It was absolutely beautiful and kind of, well, of course it's surreal here, but it was even surreal as it was happening. Um, there was a time where the beans started to transition past a barbed wire fence with an opening. And here you could see beyond the barbed wire fence. It's pretty clear, it's just a little straight, little line here and there. And in this space, I couldn't see behind it. It was even blurrier than my background is right now. I knew that I couldn't follow a lot of these beams that were crossing. I didn't know why. I wasn't asked. I didn't have a choice. I just knew I couldn't go. So I enter the last part of my experience, and now it is a dark room. And it actually feels like a room. It actually feels pretty small and confined. And there's these seven amazing, magnificent, powerful beings behind me. I don't see them, but I can feel that they're not as significant as the creator that I met in the void, in the blackness, but they are more so than the master ascended teacher I met in the white room. And in front of me, there's this beautiful floating scroll that is unrolled and beautiful sparkling golden script that is being written onto the scroll for me to read. And it is of great knowledge, great importance. And of course, my ego and all of my memories apparently decided to show up at this point. And at this point, it says, "Ha, I realized I'm egotistical, prideful," and I say, "Ha, you're showing this to a human." Well, they just, all right. A script goes away, scrolls wrote up, and I'm snapped back into my body. And
Well.
it's one thing to feel your heart start or stop. It's a whole nother thing to feel it start again. And I
Mm.
instantly felt from being in a body that is lifeless to the feeling of my heart start again. It was like huge sonic booms again. Um,
Mhm.
and I was positive that I had been dead for months. I didn't even know that I what this experience was, but in different parts along this, my consciousness had known I had died, what we consider death. And so I was terrified to open my eyes. I was like, "Oh my gosh, my parents were on their way when this happened. They ignored my wishes to be cremated. I'm going to open my eyes and be buried underground and have to figure out how to fight my way out of a coffin and 6 feet of dirt, or I'm going to die all over again. And it
Hmm.
started like huge anxiety and worry and fear. And I was so scared to open my eyes. I tried everything I could to get back to this place. And I tried slowing my breath. I tried meditating. I tried calling out again, begging, asking, um, just trying to be as peaceful and as serene as I could just to get back there. And it didn't work. It did not work at all. And eventually I opened my eyes and realized I was still in my bedroom. And so I looked at the clock and only 8 minutes had passed. So then I was even more confused. I was like, okay, so is it 8 minutes in a week, 8 minutes in a few days, like 8 minutes, 24 hours later? Like it was so, the time thing was so confusing. And it took me a good while to realize it had actually only been 8 minutes in full.
Wow, 8 minutes. So obviously, when you went over to the other side, you were in a timeless state,
Yeah,
and you
absolutely.
couldn't tell that for you, it felt like months, you said, right?
Yeah, when I got back, it felt like I had been gone months, and at least 3 weeks, long enough to be buried.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I want to ask you, very interesting. Your story is very beautiful. I want to ask you about, you said that on the other side, you were able to think a thought, and then instantly the manifestation would happen. This sounds very similar to this teaching that I'm following called Abraham Hicks. Have you ever heard of this teaching?
I sure have.
So obviously that resonates. So it seems like we have the ability, I believe they say that as well, that on the other side you can, there's no linear time. Because there's no linear time, that's why the manifestation happens instantly. But over here we have this mental construct called linear time. So usually when we attempt to manifest something, it takes some time to fall into place. Do you use, after you came out of this near-death experience, have you found that you're using law of attraction more and more on this side of the veil? Do you
Yeah,
practice that?
yeah, I mean, we have so many different names for it, law of
Hmm.
attraction is one, but, I mean, there are so many. Um, what I will say is our thoughts absolutely still create reality,
Mhm.
100%, good or bad. Um, your emotion to those thoughts is what helps create it faster. And
Mhm.
so I actually, a lot of my clients, I really work with getting rid of the fear and anxiety and worry because that emotion that's tied to it creates those things to happen much faster. And also another blessing that a lot of us do not realize is the gift of that time it takes to basically slow down those thoughts. So
Mhm.
matter is the slowest form of energy. And when you are pure energy and no matter, and of course your thoughts happen instantly. There's also no time. There's nothing to slow down. It's just there.
Mhm.
Here in our physical 3D world, it is the slowest form of energy. And so it takes time for these thoughts that are pure energy to slow down and manifest. But aren't we so lucky that that happens? Because
Yes.
what happens if, there's, I don't know, something crazy. Like let's say you, let's say you're on the ocean and you're in a boat and you're like, "Oh no, what happens if we hit a rock and we sink?" If
Mhm.
that happened instantly, then you would be sunk and you would end your life here would end
Yeah.
because it's very different than our experiences on the other side. Here,
Right.
we can be like, "Oh, but what if that doesn't happen? What if we've
Yeah.
got a great captain?" Or,
Yes.
"Oh, I've got this lifeboat," or, "I could put on this life jacket." There are so many things that we can do to prevent that thought from actually happening and occurring. So, I've only recently, been thinking about how grateful I am that we have that time. It can be very frustrating, and actually that's why I got to the gratitude is because some things aren't happening as fast as I would like them to.
Mhm.
Humans and patience, time.
That's right.
Um, Only in reflecting in how grateful I am that our thoughts do not happen instantly, especially when we have negative ones, that I've realized how much of a blessing it really is.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, how did your family and friends take to this near-death experience after you, or did you explain that to them, or what was their reaction?
Yeah, so an interesting fact that also happened, the 3 days leading up to my experience, I'm not sure when, could be the night before, my dad, who, has tried to have a conversation with God for a very long time, probably longer than I've been alive,
Mhm.
he said God talked to him, and God never talks to him, and
Mm.
saying he told God told him I was under demonic attack, which was absolutely crazy in his mind, but he knew it was God's voice. So he was even spiritually tuned in at that point. My mom, knowing kind of the things leading up to it, was all once again always so supportive, always trying to research the answers, trying to understand what had happened. I divulged to my mom about this experience, of course. I had no idea what had happened. I just knew it was like fascinating and amazing. I was really freaked out by walls and solid objects, and I felt like I had been stuffed into a sausage casing. And
Mm.
I was having kind of some trouble figuring it out. But as I'm telling her this in her mind, unbeknownst to me, so I didn't research NDEs, STEs, OBEs, out of astro traveling, gosh, you
Mhm.
name it. Basically, I was just trying to survive with an illness, so I didn't do any of this metaphysical research. However, her mom had introduced her to the world of the metaphysical world
Mhm.
and things beyond Christianity and religion. She's my grandma's dad really went in deep with religion, and it was very traumatic for their whole family. And my mom's mom actually had 3 near-death experiences.
Oh,
I didn't
wow.
know much about him. I just knew she came back with 2 pieces of wisdom from it. We're not meant to know everything, and watch your words. I didn't know anything else about it. I, heard about what my grandpa did in the aftermath of some of them, but, I didn't know.
Mhm.
So unbeknownst to me, my mom has been researching NDEs and STEs and a Kundalini awakenings, and the list goes on. And one of her first books my grandma gave to her was Dr. Raymond Moody. So
Mhm.
in my mom's mind, it's like she had a near death experience, and she even told me this was like that's crazy. There's no way. But as things got even crazier, I came back with medical intuition. I could tell where somebody was hurting because I could feel it. I would pass car wrecks and can tell you exactly what was wrong with them. If they had whiplash, seatbelt burn, or whatever you call it, bruises, broken rib, or if they had perished in the accident, I could feel the energy of plants and trees. Like I said, solid things were very foreign to me, and it was all very overwhelming. I could hear thoughts, I was very overwhelmed. Um,
Wow.
About a year later, she convinced me to go to my first IONS conference. It was in Bellevue, Washington, and my sister went with me. So at this point, my mom had shared, my sister also had some of these um, interesting metaphysical, spiritual experiences as a kid. Hers were always way more positive, and except for that crazy shadow Cape Hat Man, all of the other ones were pretty positive. Orbs, ghost, angels, stuff like that.
Mhm.
So my sister went with me, and we heard these beautiful stories, of life reviews and seeing past relatives and these marble buildings of healing and the, gates of heaven and, huge ensembles of angels, and they're beautiful. None of them sounded like mine. None
Mhm.
of them. So um, we had only gotten a couple day, 2 or 3 day pass. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't want to spend all the money on a 5 day conference when we had no idea what to expect. So we went. My sister was so supportive. She's been very supportive through all of this as well, and just kind of left like that was okay, but I still don't know. Then I had realized about a year and a half into it that I had no more symptoms of myoclonus dystonia.
Wow.
I was in such survival mode and freak out mode from all the crazy gifts I had received that I didn't even realize my chronic illness that had been plaguing me for 16 years had disappeared.
Wow.
So that's when I first went on. I thought maybe if I share my story, it'll help. And Jeff Mara invited me on his podcast.
Yeah.
He was pretty small at the time, and I thought it was a safe place. I was back in corporate America. I was back as a marketing professional, climbing my ranks up the corporate ladder. I didn't know I didn't know that I was supposed to do anything else. So, I just went back to doing what I was doing before the experience and shared with him that my experience cured my neurological disorder. And it was cool. It was awesome. It was really nice to be able to share that, but I was also felt like a safe place because there's no one who was going to hear it in the corporate world. And then my illness came back about 6 months later. And I felt like a failure. I felt like a fraud. I had just come out and shared this experience, cured my illness, and now my illness is back. And what even experience was it? And I went through a whole cycle of more, I don't know, just confusion and self loathing a little bit. Like, who am I? What was it? What was the point? Like, how does any of this make sense? So I just kind of stopped talking about it again for another couple years. Went, it went hard at work, but I was so called to volunteering in hospice. I craved being close to that side again. Even though I still hadn't really understood what it was, I just knew something incredible was beyond us and that I could hold this authentic space for people transitioning and going there. So, didn't have to share my story. I could just hold space for people, and I knew people needed that because our society is so scared of death. We're so scared of losing people. And of course, the act of dying is a very hard process to watch and probably be a part of. um, so I volunteered for hospice for 2 years in my free time, which wasn't much. I worked 50, 60 hours a week and would give an hour to 3 hours on the weekend as I could. And it was beautiful. I loved it. I wished I could do more. And then I got hired in a great firm, 1,600 miles away from where I was living, and moved and just kept doing what I thought I was supposed to be doing and got another traumatic diagnosis. This time it was treatable, it was a cancer diagnosis. And right around that time, the world shut down. Um, we were all there. So, just all of these crazy things came, and my illness was progressing, and I was starting to lose my ability to walk, to type, to text. My tremors had gotten very, very bad. I could no longer button my clothes, put on eyeliner, put on backs of my earrings. So I moved back to Colorado and finally found a neurologist that was willing to perform experimental brain surgery. And it was pretty successful. He did warn that myoclonus dystonia is a cunning illness and it will possibly learn a way around the system. I got a deep brain stimulator put in, and it was great for a year. Absolutely great. But then the myoclonus dystonia started learning its way around the system, and I kept needing more amp, more voltage, more electricity to my brain. But I figured finally I had a team to take care of my physical body. And I was going to work on some other things, some programs that had been written out of survival that I no longer needed. I left corporate America. I was told I needed to write a book or some books. And I was never a huge reader. So I'm like, really? Seriously? And I wrote my first book, White Flame, all about my near death experience and my NDE, and was officially out of the closet.
Good.
Then my mom and I co-authored a book, Wired to be Dysfunctional, all about our journey with myoclonus dystonia, thinking, the brain surgery was going to be the end of my story. It wasn't. I started doing a deep dive into the spiritual realm. I spoke at IONS and was very successful with my first two books and started getting certified in everything. EFT, TFT, Ericksonian hypnosis, NLP, therapeutic art, life coaching. Um, I think there's some more things. And then started really deep diving into meditation. I'd only known about mindfulness meditation up until this point, and I started researching more of Dr. Joe Dispenza, Bruce, Bruce, Bruce
Lipton.
Lipton, Greg
Yes.
Braden. I like to
Yeah.
mix up those letters.
Yeah. Yep.
Abraham Hicks, Neville Goddard. I mean, the list is really starting to get bigger and bigger, and they're all these same ideas just spoken differently. And how much it correlates to what I experienced about our thoughts being able to create, and then being able to heal ourselves. I got really interested in, because I was like, oh yeah, especially mentally and emotionally, if it's all programs, we can rewrite those programs. So as I started meditating to rewrite these programs, I actually healed myself of my myoclonus dystonia. And I was,
Permanently this time.
was that?
Permanently this time.
Yeah, permanently this time.
Very
I
good.
was I was able to shut off my deep brain stimulator that I had really wanted for 12 years
Oh, very good. Yeah.
before I got it. I'd been suffering for 20 years when I finally got the deep brain stimulator. And after a meditation, I was back in the blackness. I was back in the void. I was back in where everything and anything is possible and created. And I
Yes.
saw a code from my tunnel come and circulate and rewire my brain. So then, I had this emotional healing, mental healing, spiritual healing, and physical healing. And my third book, Leads to Nowhere, is about how those two things were so intertwined and divine. I didn't really realize how the two experiences were related, other than it happened within my body, until a few years later. And going back to hindsight and looking back on everything, I realized that the monks were laughing at me because there is no such thing as death. So when I asked, "Am I dead?" they thought it was funny because it's an irrelevant question.
Oh, wonderful. I like that.
Yeah.
That's great. So obviously you don't have any fear of death, I take it.
No, I didn't even as a child.
Yeah, oh, that's right. Yeah, you did mention something to that effect. So, what is your view on fundamentalist religion now? Because it sounds like you kind of started your journey from that perspective, and then it seems like you kind of transcended that to some degree. I mean, obviously, you still respect all religions, but it seems like you've kind of moved on from that to some degree. Would that be right to say?
Absolutely. So, I respect many forms of religion, and I've even been criticized for that. Um, especially
Okay.
with fundamentalist Christians. But as more of an
Yeah.
obvious point of view, there's a truth. There's a little bit of truth in every one of them. And what it is,
Hmm.
when you see shape in the clouds, your brain is trying to make sense of the chaos. And I feel like that's what religion is trying to make sense of the chaos and explain the unexplainable. But what is beautiful about a lot of these religions is there are many of them. I haven't studied all of them. I don't even know how many there are. Hundreds. But on a lot of them, especially, the most popular ones today, they have really good values on ways we should try to live our life. You know, the ways to protect your heart, ways to protect your body. Like certain religions, you're not supposed to eat pork because it's a dirty animal, and there's a lot of things that can transmute to the human body. Doesn't mean you. I mean, religion says don't eat it, but it doesn't mean you. Spirituality says you shouldn't eat it. Like it's a
Exactly.
guideline. Um,
Right.
and same with relationships, and just different ways to go about relationships and marriages, and all that stuff. A lot of these have beautiful guidelines to protect your body and your heart to try to make it easier. But yeah, what I experienced is beyond any religion. I came back on the hunt for religion who had it right,
Hmm.
because I knew my religion surely didn't. It was beyond what I had been taught, and especially with this vengeful, angry, which is more Catholicism, is the vengeful, angry God that you're going to go to hell no matter what
Right.
you do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Even in
Pretty hard to measure up to that standard
yeah,
because
uh,
everybody's flawed, right? So it's
yeah,
pretty
everyone,
hard to measure.
absolutely everyone, and
Yeah.
so there's just a lot of things that didn't make sense. So I went on a hunt. Turns out no one had it right. No one had it completely wrong, but no one had it right. So that's where I'm at. I absolutely respect anyone's path. We have these soul contracts that we come in and we design our lives. That includes our gender, our race, our um, physical abilities or disabilities, socioeconomic status, where we're at in the world, location wise, religion, country. I mean, all these things are pre planned so that we have a certain experience and we learn certain lessons. So I think coming at as a respectful view towards any and everyone is really where I'm at.
So would you say that although there is this pre-planning that takes place and there is a certain propensity towards soul planning, it seems like when it comes to the law of attraction and people like Bashar, I don't know if you know Bashar,
Don't know that.
he's similar to Abraham Hicks, it's a channeled thing. And he kind of says that you can, once you wake up, you can change the theme. So things are laid out a certain way, but then when you wake up, because you can create your own reality with your thoughts. So obviously, reality is very malleable, he says. And I had another guest who does this thing called quantum jumping, where she's able to jump into different realities and then she shifts her life. So it seems like while it could be true that there's a pre-planning thing, it seems like it's not just one track. It seems like it's almost like two tracks. You can dovetail on and off that pre-planned journey, would you say?
I would call that paying off your contract when you're finally able to do that. So much like paying down a house, a mortgage, you can have these installments so that you get to your goal at the end of 30 years, or you can pay it off in bulk and do whatever you want.
So how do
So
we pay it off? How do we pay it off in full?
yeah,
Love?
so
Love more?
yeah, I get that question a lot. It's gonna be your awakening process. It's going to be
Mm,
um, observing these lessons, these patterns. If they keep happening and you're not learning from them, you're still on that monthly plan, right? But if
I
you
see.
actually pay attention to the lessons and the patterns that are happening, then you can, heal from them. You can be aware, you can change, you can redirect. And that is paying off in balloon payments when you're
Mm,
actually becoming more aware. And that's what awakening is. If you just keep going through life as this programmed monthly payment, then yeah,
mm,
you're probably not going to awaken or pay off your soul contract. But if you do the work, and sometimes that's shadow work, inner child work, your emotion body code, my program may be um, changing your old identity into this new creator identity, from
yes.
just programmed to creator. That's the
Hmm.
difference.
Yeah, that makes sense because in that when identity is everything, because if you identify just as a human, it's a very, very narrow, but if you identify as that you have a body, which is a physical vessel that you can express your divinity through, and you switch your identity to that being well, not of course not negating the humanness, because that's important not to do that, but embracing it as a totality, and your true identity is divine, then I think you can pay off that mortgage faster. Maybe,
Absolutely. 100%.
maybe. So, all right. So this has been a very, very interesting story. So now you do this, so death doula, is that like what you were telling us about earlier? You talked about being in the hospice, or is it different? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's very similar. So,
Okay.
as a death doula, I'm a midwife to the afterlife, and
Interesting.
I help people with all end of life challenges and planning. So, it is beyond just active dying, which is where hospice comes in. I help people who are, young couples or young families get their advanced directive set up in case of, accidents. Sicknesses happen all the time. Accidents happen, and you might be in a vegetative state. How
Hmm.
do you want to be treated? How do you protect your family from making decisions that align with yours? Um, how to maintain an autonomy when you are unable to speak for yourself. These kinds of things I can do anytime it comes up. I mean, as early as basically 18. I'm very passionate about this. I've seen a lot of families that didn't have these in place, and it causes a lot of turmoil, especially one member makes the decision. Like, let's say spouses, they one has terminal illness, they no longer want to pursue treatment, and their spouse understands that commitment, but their children don't, or the spouse's family members don't. If there is an advance directive, it saves the spouse from legal repercussions if she chooses to end life support, or whatever. So
Mhm.
it protects families. It really gets your wishes known out there ahead of time. You can update it anytime. So if your thoughts change, that's fine. Education is a huge part about the whole death, dying, and afterlife. Not necessarily the afterlife, because how do I educate it when I experienced it for only 8 minutes in this real time? I can educate what I've learned from my own experience and what I've learned from others. But death and dying, and how to get through the grieving process a little more gracefully, a little less painfully, is a huge, huge thing for me. So, really helping family members, and just really helping people embrace their authentic spiritual self as they're transitioning, or even before. I've had one client that she has grown immensely. She's in her late 80s, and she thought she's already had a heart attack, and she called me. I'm ready to go at the drop of a hat. I've got my bags packed, and I went to the hospital. She didn't know what was going on. She was really scared. Um,
Mm.
but it was a false alarm, you know. But seeing her grow, because we've stayed really close, I'm her death doula, and just seeing her spiritually mature and figure out where her values really lie, what's important, what's not, has been really, really honoring to see. And to be able to
Yeah.
bring that to anyone and everyone is huge. As a spiritual doula, I help people birth into their authentic selves, and usually that includes majority of rewriting these old programs, creating a new
Mm.
identity. So let's say you have another 40 years to live, but you've got a chronic illness. Well, you can become the creator and pay off that soul contract and create a whole new 40-year future ahead of you. So, um,
Mhm.
and I kind of, got those two together. I realized that I had this knack and this ability by being a death doula, and with my medical intuition, along with some other gifts, really help. I'm really able to help people both actively dying, anything death, end of life related, grieving, families, as well as people who are just ready to awaken and step into their full spiritual selves, which is
I
so fun.
like that. It sounds like you're bringing life to those that are in the throes of death.
Can I take that? That's
Yeah, I know.
beautiful.
It just kind of like, I think I channeled that one.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bringing life
Yeah, because
to
I wanted to put a very positive spin on it because what you do is you're bringing joy to those that are in the throes of death. And like you said, some people maybe have many, many years to live yet and they can improve their experience here. I often say in my teachings that, because we're the creators of our own reality, we can choose. Do you want to have a nightmare or do you want to have a beautiful dream?
yeah.
Once we wake up anyway, then we can make that choice. So you said at the beginning of the podcast that you had quite a few encounters with these entities, and some of it was quite intense and rather dark. And I don't want to scare the audience. I want to let the audience know that you probably have slightly different view of these entities now. Maybe you view them more with unconditional love. How do you view these now?
Yeah. So definitely do not be fearful. That's what attracts them to.
Yeah, right.
So huge, take off list. Do not be fearful.
Yeah.
Another thing is, I mentioned my sister also had, these experiences and these gifts, and yet hers were more on the positive side. I've also,
Yes.
yeah, I've reflected on why that is.
Okay.
She was not a sick child, and I was. I was a confused, fearful, sick child.
Yes.
My body was betraying me. No one could explain what was going on. I
Mhm.
grew up in a medical family that was confused. So I was fearful. I was tired. I was fatigued. I was in pain. My energy was low. I had low elevated emotions quite often. I had low energy. And my sister wasn't that way. She was joyful. She was grateful. She was energetic. And that was, looking back, was the difference. So if you're fearful, just start changing those emotions, start changing those thought patterns, and that alone will keep them away. I'm no longer fearful. I don't have an ounce of fear in my body that these things will come back. I will see them again. I will be affected by them ever because one, my NDE, I was renamed, which was really cool. When I came back, I was renamed a number though. So,
Mm,
growing
okay.
up in a religious family, I knew stories of the Bible where people
Yeah.
had been renamed these amazing, different names after huge talks with God or encounters with God or tasks
Okay.
from God. And,
Okay.
they were other actual normal names. I was
Wow.
renamed 1048.
Nice.
What?
Well, it
um,
must be good. It must be good
well,
because
so luckily, my mom, who studies like crazy, wants to know anything and everything, was studying gematria and the numerology of the Bible. So
right.
her and my sister looked up what 1048 meant. It led to 2 Samuel 22:19. For I was saved from my strong enemy and those that hated me, for they were too strong for me. And it perfectly explains those moments before my experience and after. Um, just that complete freedom, complete serenity. And so one, I knew that I had my energy bubble was renewed and these things would no longer come after me. But I also keep them away, especially as I do transcendental meditations now. I
Oh,
keep
okay.
them away because I start from a place of gratitude and I start with a place of love. So I've got these highly elevated emotions and these things can't touch either.
Wow. I think I'm going to cry. I really appreciate what you just shared. I think that's very valuable for the audience. I mean, it's one thing to share our experiences when they're intense and dark, but then to show that we're not victims of anything and that it's the vibrational state that we're in. I know Abraham Hicks says that nothing outside of you can harm you. You have to be a vibrational match. So if you're in this fearful, like you said, yeah, I did notice that earlier. You said about your sister had more positive, even though she was going through much the similar, I mean, minus the illness, right? She was going through much the similar experiences with the entities you were, and yet she was seeing it more from a joyful perspective and was having a more positive experience. I think it's, yeah, the vibrational state, right? If you're in gratitude, if you're in joy, if you try to stay there as much as you can throughout the day, you're if you do experience entities, they're going to be joyful ones, be positive ones, and and whatever those beings are, we send them love. I think they need the most love because if they're in a very low place, because anything that anyone or anything that wants to hurt another must already be hurt. Yes, because
Yes.
hurt people, and I assume that probably works the same way for other entities as well if they're not in a good place. So, but there's hope for everyone.
Yeah. You say hurt people hurt people. What I love is healed people heal people.
Oh, that's even better. I love that. That's a flip side. That's a bit. I like that side. That's a good. Yes, absolutely. And the hurt people can be healed, and then they can heal people. So very good. Okay, let's wrap things up. This has been a very delightful conversation, but I want to find out where can people contact you if they would like a session, or because you do the death doula, but you do other things. It sounds like you are EFT and many other modalities. What is your main thing that you give as sessions for people?
Yeah, so it's a pretty standard 1 hour. I can cover a lot. And that is for any kind of support you seek, whether it's death related, illness related, spirit related. I just call it one on one support. Um,
Hmm.
and that can be found on my web. Everything can be found on my website, whether that's my socials you want to follow. podcasts like this one will be on there as well. Maybe you're watching it on there. I don't know.
Yes.
My books and all that. I also have a pretty extensive program that helps you get rid of the old programs and old identity to your new future identity. But all of that can be found through my website and emailing me if you have any questions.
Okay, and what is your website? We will put the link underneath the video, but what do you want to say what your website is?
I
Name?
do because
Okay.
I had to go with my zero, and it became a pretty difficult business name in the
Oh,
long
yeah,
run.
yeah.
But it's a www.bricllc.com.
So zero as in Zero or the number zero?
The number. So
Okay. All right.
people don't know if it's an O or a zero. It is a zero. Because of
Very
all the
good.
bionic code I saw and all the numbers,
Yeah.
my name, everything. And yeah, so I had to go with the zero because it was really cool. It does make it difficult for business, but it's worth it.
But very good. You're being authentic. You're being your authentic self. I love that. Okay, so Bri, if there's one pearl of wisdom you could share with the world, what would it be?
Yeah, it's your thoughts create reality, and we are blessed to have the time to create the perfect reality.
I love it. I love it. Thank you very much, Bri, for being a guest on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. That's it. That's another edition of the Soul Inspire podcast. Check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Now we're on Spotify as well. So, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or check us out, of course, on the YouTube channel if you want to watch the video. And head over to Bri's site because I'm sure she'll throw a link up there too, and you can watch it on there. Thank you so much, or her podcast. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Bye for now. The Soul Inspire podcast is brought to you by DaleCross.net. Discover the freedom, bliss, and ecstasy within you. At DaleCross.net, I can help connect you with your soul's purpose, passion, and mission. Your soul signed up for something great. Discover what it is with the tools I offer. Book a free one-on-one consultation now at DaleCross.net and live your greatness.